Hello, I'm Tara Brabazon and welcome to the post 94, How to Structure a PhD. Okay, there are certain requests that I get that I start collecting information, start doing the reading, and it's pretty clear that the material that I'm reading to research this post, or indeed the earlier vlogs, is pretty poor. There's a whole series of pretty straightforward and often #wrong guides. And this is one of those topics, how to structure a PhD. There's a lot of pretty low grade material. So I've had a file open on this topic for about 7 years. But what's crystallized this particular vlog and why I've sort of gathered all the reasonably mediocre material into some sort of form for you is I received a fantastic request from one of my great mates in Vancouver who's in a bit of a difficult space. He just cannot work out how to get the structure of his PhD right. So in response, let me present this post. And yes, we may do other posts that come from it. You tell me what you need. But this is the one where we're going to talk about and take on, grab it by the neck. We're going to look at how to structure a PhD. And this post has two parts. I think the first part is a lot more important than the second part. Probably you will think the second part is a lot more important than the first part. But the first part of this vlog, I want to present for you 5 organizing principles about how you bring together form and content in your PhD. That's the first part. The second part, I then present what you all want, which is the normative organizational structure for a PhD. I really hate doing this sort of work, and let me just state right at the start that the notion that a PhD is sort of paint by numbers or connect the dots, that there's a singular structure for a PhD is absolute nonsense, and I would argue pretty damn dangerous. You see, PhDs are diverse in their organisation, in their very bespoke relationship between form and content. And yes, absolutely, every PhD has sections and topics and tropes and ideas that must be addressed, absolutely. But the notion that there is a template, a template into which all PhDs are poured is absolute nonsense. So what's happening once more is that supervisors have assumptions about what a PhD is, students have assumptions about what a PhD is and how it's structured, and these two groups never actually share those assumptions. So instead of actually having a conversation, a robust and powerful conversation about the relationship between form and content in research, let alone a PhD, templates are provided. Are you kidding me? Templates are provided, and often this is a very, very inelegant way of organising information, let alone knowledge, for an examiner. So this template stuff, and a lot of universities have a template. This template stuff has some causes. Firstly, a lack of educational qualifications from supervisors. We talk a lot about the data point of one. When I did my PhD, so the structure that the supervisor used for the PhD, they assume that's the only structure that is available. And that's, for example, also why the PhD by publication has such evangelical support from particular supervisors, because you see the PhD by publication, so intro, outro, some publications in the middle, the reason that has so many evangelical supporters is we've firstly been proliferating assumptions from the empirical sciences, and that's spread to other disciplines, and that's deeply problematic. And can I say also, if one is assuming a particular scientific method in and of itself, that reifies the contemporary scientific methods. And as we know in that vlog we did, I think it was post 80 on Michael Polanyi, he argued very strongly there is not a singular scientific method, there are many. So you can see what's happening here. We've got all these reified assumptions about how a PhD is structured, and it's getting worse and it's causing problems. Also, one of the reasons I think that the worst of supervisors endlessly talk and recommend the PhD by publication, besides the fact that they can pick up free publications on the way through, is that the student and the supervisor don't have to think about the structure at all. They simply intro, outro, and they use refereed articles to provide the structure for the thesis. Now, as you've heard me say thousands of times, refereed articles are different from doctorates. Refereeing is different from examining. This is not hard. But besides the PhD by publication, we tend to forget about the differences, the multiplicities that can occur when we are constructing a doctorate. And what this PhD by publication and other templates do is they stop students, they stop researchers thinking actively about the organisation of knowledge, how form and content dance. Now, doctorates are diverse, and the organisation of doctorates, wow, is diverse. Therefore, I just wanted to make sure in the first half of this post, you are getting some maxims for your consideration. So I want you to think widely and wildly and expansively and evocatively about bringing together the relationship between form and content. So I'm doing that by giving you 5 maxims to consider to bring them together. And then I'll finish off with your headings about the organisation, the normative organisation of a PhD. Okay, and can I say the structure that I'm going to introduce in the second half of this post is not the structure that I used. My PhD had 12 chapters, had an intro and a conclusion as well, 12 chapters. It had 6 theory chapters. I used unobtrusive research methods and integrated literature reviews. So what I did had nothing to do with what I'm presenting for you, data set of 1. But can I say from the 200 plus graduate students I've supervised, about 25% have used this type of organisation for their thesis, and they are located in allied health, applied social sciences, social work, nursing, midwifery, disability studies, and of course education theses. So in the applied social sciences and going into the lab-based sciences, you'll start to use that type of structure. But look, the reason I've gone, okay, I'll present an organisational structure, is if you are stuck like my mate in Vancouver. So look, where am I starting? What am I doing? This at least gives you a breadcrumbed trail to get you organised at the start, and hopefully then you can move to a more expansive exploration of the relationship between form and content. So let's begin with the first half and the organisational principles that are in place. Right, so Stage 1. A thesis must demonstrate the acquisition and dissemination of new knowledge. So everything you do in the structure must show how you have acquired information and how you are disseminating it to an audience, particularly examiners. So students must demonstrate that they know their research field. And the easiest way, of course, to do this is through a literature review, which is why you have a literature review chapter. But systematic reviews, scoping reviews are also gaining great popularity, particularly in nursing, midwifery, and social work. But you've got to show that you not only know the field, but you need to prove that you know it in writing. And therefore, once you've proven that you know the field you're talking about, then you can confirm the gap in knowledge that your thesis will fill. So any student that sort of states blandly, I know what I'm doing, I'm terrific, this is new knowledge, great, and doesn't actually write through the argument, form and content, well, they're just delusional. You need to prove that you know the field and your place in it. And the confirmation of that expertise must be embedded, baked into your structure. Just because the field is new for you doesn't mean it's new for everybody else. You have to verify and demonstrate the newness. The thesis must demonstrate respect for the field, respect for the previous workers in the field, and the knowledge, the texture, and the shape of your disciplines. Put bluntly, your structure must answer the question, what are you doing in this thesis? Okay, that's my first maxim. The second maxim, you must demonstrate how you've constructed the research. So you must demonstrate, yes, the methods by which you have gained new information, new data sets. Those methods must be clear, verifiable, accountable, and in some disciplines, repeatable. Put another way, how are you building the pathway between where knowledge is currently and where you are taking us? You must present the steps in building the pathway to knowledge, and that includes the strengths and the weaknesses of your methods. It must include ethical concerns and how you are managing to build the pathway to knowledge, respecting where you start the journey and finishing it with respect and decency as well. Okay, my third maxim, you must show why the work matters. There has to be clear and convincing arguments about why this doctorate matters, why it is needed. These arguments exist throughout the document, but they tend to cluster in your abstract, introduction, and conclusion. This can include, obviously, personal motivation. That's great. But the reason you're doing a PhD must transcend personal motivation. The research may be important for a profession or an industry. You may be engaging with impact and engagement. Terrific. And you can certainly reveal the failings of earlier work, that's fine, but it is important to be intellectually generous. We as examiners, we as supervisors get a bit horrified when a student goes, all of this is rubbish. All these great minds were not great minds, they're rubbish. And my thesis is amazing, right? No, you must demonstrate intellectual generosity throughout the thesis. Demonstrate the link, and this is hard to do. This is what a structure's got to do. Demonstrate the link between the past work in this field and your work in this field. And this is why it's so important, you see, that you are thorough in your reading. You have to carefully present the how and the what of your research. And unless you spend some quality time looking at the how and the what of your research, then the why of your research dies on the vine. Okay, my fourth maxim. Just because you believe it doesn't mean it's true. Now, a dire problem in theses that completely destroys their structure is the confusion of personal feelings and academic interests. Feelings are different from evidence. Okay, a thesis is not a diary of work done. It is not a lab book. It's not how you feel about the research. Now, positionality theory is now quite advanced. So if you want to talk about your positioning in relation to the research, that's great. It doesn't need your feelings or all this sort of stuff. You are able to configure positionality through very strong theoretical frameworks. Now, whether you're in the high humanities and creative-led research, whether you are in physics, we've got great theory on positionality now. Great work, can I say, in the medical sciences as well. So if you want to present your lens on your research, that's great, but use the theory to do so. And can I say, this problem, confusion of feelings and evidence, particularly emerges in creative-led research, which is why they have such a messy pathway through examination. So whenever we have disciplines or research areas where personal bias or assumptions are offered at the start of the thesis, then that bias can corrode literature reviews and it can corrode your methods. So be very careful when you are structuring your thesis about how you present your positionality. caution, care, and being very respectful in the presentation of your emotions is required. Just because you feel strongly about something does not mean that it's knowledge. Therefore, and I suppose I'm so up for this week and so worried about this, is in the last week, I heard a supervisor tell a student that a PhD is a diary of their candidature. Wow. A PhD is not a diary of a candidature. It is not a lab book. Your PhD structure must allow a logical, rational, and verifiable connection between your research questions and your research outcomes. It's got to be clear. The reason a PhD structure exists is for the assessment and evaluation of your research by others. A PhD is not granted for time served or experiments done or words written. It does not matter how great your research is. What matters is how that research is presented for assessment. Cool. And my fifth maxim, demonstrate that you have a grasp of academic protocols. Boom. The structure of your thesis must demonstrate that you know what you're doing. And that means that referencing must be transparent, academic protocols must be transparent, but also academic integrity matters must be verifiable. Can you write? Can you order your thoughts? Can you configure an argument for other people beyond yourself? Right. So any structure or organizational protocol that you choose for your thesis must render your ideas verifiable beyond the self. Your significant original contribution to knowledge, your SOC, must be verifiable throughout the thesis. Okay. So I've done my rant. There are your 5 maxims to think about to make sure your form and content of the thesis darts. Now I'll do the paint by number stuff that I hate so much. Let me go through and present the normative organisation for you. Let's do this quickly. So the first stage of a thesis is the preliminary matter. Now, this is important and it's common to all theses, no matter what the discipline. Now, different universities may require that you present the preliminary matter in a different order. That's cool. But all of these components are actually crucial. So what do we got? Well, we've got the title page. Cool, thanks for playing. We've got the declaration from candidates, that's you, hi. Declaration from candidates that it is your work. Some systems around the world increasingly, and I agree with this, demand that the supervisor also signs a declaration about research and academic integrity, and some universities are now placing authenticate or other text matching protocols in the preliminary matter as well for the assessment by examiners. I agree with that, and we may see that increasing in future. Also in the preliminary matter, you have your acknowledgements. Less is more team, please don't thank deities, please don't thank cats, knock yourself out. Then we move to the table of contents, and that's often followed by a list of abbreviations, a list of tables, a list of figures. I read a thesis a couple of weeks ago that had a list of boxes throughout the thesis. Fantastic. So these are very simple tasks to complete the preliminary matter. It's important, but if you're having a bad day, if you're going, oh no, bad day, focus on the preliminary matter. Needs to be done. Great, thanks for playing. The second stage, number 2, is the abstract. Now, the length of abstract varies between universities and varies pretty widely, can I say, between about 250 words to about 1,000 words. 250 is too short, 1,000 is too long, 750, 850 is about the sweet spot. Now, in your abstract, don't bury the lead. Make sure in the first paragraph, in the first 4 sentences, there is a sentence that says, my significant original contribution to knowledge is. Don't bury the lead, let the examiner find it. Okay, what you're doing in the abstract is you're exploring why the thesis matters and why the thesis exists now. Now, if you need a few more questions to scaffold what you're doing, let me try and help you. So some questions that might trigger the abstract for you. Why has this thesis been written? What is the current state of your field that has created this particular gap in research or the literature? What are your research questions? What is methodologically innovative in this thesis? What is your key finding or perhaps findings? What are the implications of those findings? Now, some of those questions may help you. There may be just one question that is able to power the engine of your abstract. But please remember, from basically the first week of your candidature, open up an abstract file. Now, I know at the start you go, nah, and of course it won't be finished until you've actually finished your first draft, but you will be amazed how frequently throughout the entire candidature, one day you write an amazing sentence, one, and you go, oh yeah, and that goes straight into your abstract. You write the abstract all the way through, finishing at the end of the first full draft. Okay, let's move to stage 3. And yes, we are at the introduction. Right, probably the most important work you write. The introduction sets the scene. It presents your thesis statement, your problem statement, your SOC, your research questions, depending on the discipline. The introduction is the most important piece of work that you write for your examiner. The examiner, and can I say all other readers, should be able to read your introduction and know what the thesis is about. What the hell are we doing here? So we should see the subject of the thesis, why it matters, why the thesis was conducted now, and the justification for the structure and organisation. So this is the point in the introduction where you talk about for the examiner how you've created the relationship between form and content. Yes, the introduction talks about your structure and shows why you have selected this particular structure for your doctorate. Explain it to your examiners. Now, talk about the contribution to your field and how this doctorate builds from your field. The rationale, the background for the study should all be present in the introduction. So you can discuss your motivation as well and how your motivation led to your interest in this topic. The introduction remains absolutely crucial for your examiners and indeed the success of the thesis. You are setting the scene, why the thesis matters. But you're also explaining to the examiner, and this is the trick, team, you're explaining to the examiner the genre of the thesis, how the thesis will be assessed, and you're starting to create that movement between ontology and epistemology in this thesis. So if you've deployed a scientific method, one of them, that's great, that's important. Speak that, write that down, because that's very different from jurisprudence, a high theory thesis within jurisprudence. So provide the framework through which the thesis can be assessed. Now, as you can see, the construction of this introduction determines how the rest of the thesis is to be addressed and assessed. It is the lens, it is the frame. And sadly these days, and I'll just put this out there, some universities around the world can't breathe. Some universities around the world want to call the introduction chapter 1. Are you kidding me? And often the conclusion is called a chapter as well. This is nonsense. What should happen is introduction, conclusion, introduction, chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, however many you've got, conclusion. Now, your university may want to say, unbelievably, that the introduction is chapter 1. Let them have it. When you're writing it for publication, an introduction is not a chapter, it's an introduction. A conclusion is not a chapter, it's a conclusion. I've probably lost that battle. Let's move to stage 4, which is chapter 1. That is the chapter that follows the introduction. Now, this is in a normative model, often the literature review or alternative modes of presenting your literature. So it offers a survey of the literature, a critical engagement with the literature, and how the literature relates to, connects to the research conducted in this thesis. So you need to demonstrate in this chapter that you know enough to know what you don't know. A literature review or a scoping review or a systematic review, whatever is trendy at a particular time, has really 3 purposes. It explains the already existing information in your field. This is the what question of your field. What exists in this area in your field? That's the first job of a literature review. The second is a literature review must highlight the gaps, the issues, the problems that are emerging in the literature for your particular topic, and therefore that's the gap. It provides the space for your research. And the third reason that a literature review exists is to be intellectually generous, to demonstrate that you are respectful of the great scholars that came before you to investigate this topic. Okay, let's move to stage 5. This is chapter 2. This is the theory chapter. Now we get a bit interesting. There have been some major critiques of contemporary theses and what's happening in contemporary theses at the moment. And you remember when we did the vlog on Professor Wahig, his critique of doctoral education right now is the lack of theoretical engagement. Okay, so most theses that I read at the moment as an examiner do not have a theory chapter. Okay, so this is a moment for you to make a decision in your research. You have to decide, are you going to have a theory chapter or not? Let's talk about it. So theory, capital T, small t, is the scaffold for your research. To use a different metaphor, it is the bricks that build up your thesis. Now, as we all know, the word theory, capital T, small t, has different uses in the sciences and the humanities, but it is crucial for both. The function of a theory chapter, depending on the discipline, is as follows. What are the key theories, concepts and tropes that you are using in your research? So in the sciences, what is your hypothesis? In the humanities, what is your thesis statement? So why have you chosen this theoretical framework for your thesis? What are the strengths of this theoretical framework in your thesis, and what are the weaknesses? What does this theoretical selection block from your vista or your view? So the hard thing to do, and this is hard yakka, is to explain, to build the relationship between theory and your literature review. So you're connecting this chapter with the last chapter, right? So what does this theory reveal about your epistemology and your ontology? A great theory chapter allows you to reveal, to exfoliate the assumptions from your research. It also provides the foundation for any empirical data sets that you're going to be developing. It allows you to build the relationships between concepts. Remember, ontology, by many of its definitions, allows you to build relationships between objects and ideas in the world. In all disciplines, a theory chapter provides the assumptions to test or provides a sense-making mechanism for interpretation. So if you like, I'll give you one more metaphor if this helps. Theory is a toolbox. What tools are you going to need to build this thesis? And the theory chapter presents that toolbox for examiners to assess. Cool. Let's move to stage 6. We're winning. Chapter 3. So we're at research design and or methodology. So the next 3 chapters, again, in applied social science theses, the next 3 chapters are the meat and potatoes of the thesis, right? So what you're doing is in these 3 chapters, you're developing your research design, you're implementing your research design, and you're assessing or evaluating the data sets you've created. 1, 2, 3, not hard. But let's get this chapter 3 cooking. This is methodology, methods, modes of data collection. Every thesis has a research design. Every thesis has methods and methodologies, even if it's unobtrusive research methods. So this chapter is pretty different from the others that you write in a thesis. It tends to be quite descriptive. And what you're doing is you are answering the question, how? How will you address and answer your research questions? This is the how. How will you gather information? That's what you're doing. And the other key question, if you can, is, okay, how are you going to be gathering information? And is this different from how other people in your discipline or field have gathered information? Remember, the methodology is the why of the how. Why you have chosen this particular way of organizing ideas and gathering information. What techniques, what tools have you used, and then you explain how you are going to use them. Also, and this is important, I love this is my favorite stuff to read as a supervisor or examiner actually, is talk about the strengths and the weaknesses of this methodology. So what benefits do those methods provide, but also what information are you not able to collect through that selection of methods. Ethical considerations are also present in this chapter, and they arch out to your appendices where you present all those ethical clearances. Okay, here we go. Let's go to stage 7. We're getting there, we're nearly through. Stage 7 is chapter 4 and 5. Sometimes it moves to 3 chapters, but chapters 4 and 5, how you have implemented your research design, how you've gathered your data, what data you gathered, and then the next chapter is interpreting the data you gathered. Sometimes the interpretation of the data set is split into 2 chapters, but mostly it's 2. What you gathered through your data collection, and then next chapter, how you interpreted it. So what you're doing in these 2 chapters is you're taking your research design for a walk. You're presenting your research analysis. Now, remember, these are 2 chapters, data collection, data interpretation. Separate them out. I find it terribly artificial too, but this is the applied social science methodology. So this is critical really to the discussion and the presentation of your own work. What did you find? What went right? What went wrong? Did you have to adjust your methods iteratively because of failures? And you know, I love failures. Put the failures, oh, I tried this and it was a stuff up. What a mess. Put all of this in your data collection chapter. Show how you are answering your research questions through these 2 chapters. Hard to do. So in these chapters of data collection and interpretation, you need to confirm precision, accountability, transparency, and in some disciplines, of course, repeatability. Here's my maxim: make the case, don't assume the case. Sometimes this data collection chapter is described as an empirical chapter. That's fine, but again, very simple chapter this. What did you find? Show us the stuff, right? But again, it's got to be accurate. It will be checked. So this chapter must present what resulted from your data collection and the implementation of your research methods. Are there any surprises? Love surprises. Are there any surprises? And did the data set that you gather gel with previous studies or discredit previous studies? Are you seeing any clusters, anything weird emerging. So remember, in this chapter, you're simply presenting your findings. The interpretation is kicked over to the next chapter. So this chapter is data heavy, but what follows then is the discussion chapter. It's often called a series of other things depending on the discipline, but it is the interpretation chapter of your data collection. So what does this discussion or interpretation chapter do? Well, you start to draw the connections from the existing literature, and you're aligning it with your research and your results. Taking the data, connecting it to the previously existing research, and building to your significant original contribution to knowledge. So what makes this chapter so difficult is you're having to explain your results, and the question that guides the explanation of your results is, so what? Okay, you got the data, what do I care? What do I care? You're demonstrating rigor, logical arguments, why you have reached particular conclusions, particular interpretive strategies. Now, this can be the toughest chapter, it often is, because this is where the rubber meets the road. This is where you are proving your SOC. You are working with the synthesis of other people's work, but you have to take the next step and demonstrate newness. Remember, synthesis is a master's degree. New work, SOC, that's a PhD. To understand the difference between these chapters, just think about one presents your data set, the other one interprets your data set. Let's go to stage 8. Right, yay! We're at the conclusion stage. Now, I'm incredibly comfortable with a big, robust, courageous conclusion. Ignore everybody that says a conclusion is 5 pages. They do not know what they're talking about. That thesis will bounce through examination. The conclusion is crucial because it talks about what you've done, why you've done it, what went right, what went wrong, perhaps trajectories for future research. You are confirming the SOC. SOC, 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 SOC. You're confirming the SOC. You're confirming future work and trajectories. Sometimes this is called the implications of your research. So at its best, it is capturing something about the trajectories of your research, how it may travel. The significance of the research really matters here, but so does the presentation of the mistakes, the flaws, the shortcomings. So when you present the challenges, what went wrong, that's a proxy for your research integrity. Don't mask the problems. Think about the conclusion. I was trying to think about the best way to explain this to you. And basically what happens is you present threads. You start threads in the fabric through your research questions. And what you do in the conclusion is you make sure that those threads have been pulled through the entire thesis, and then you hem them nicely in the conclusion. So in the conclusion, be confident. Remove passive voice. You are here to confirm your expertise. What have you discovered? So the conclusion reconfirms your research questions and demonstrates how you have answered them. Discuss the SOC, and how the SOC has emerged from the study. That's key. Okay, stage 9, nearly done. We're at the appendix. Now, after the conclusion, it is appendix time. I love good appendices, and all sorts of things can exist here. It's a fun space. Ethics clearances can exist. You can present your publications or conference papers, or indeed posters exist in this space. Copyright clearances exist here. All of this material exists for your examiners to verify that you know what you're doing and you've done the right thing. You're allowing them to check. Transparency, boom. And stage 10, woo, woo, woo. References and or bibliography. After your appendices, it is time for your references and or your bibliography. And so just so we all agree on these terms. A reference list is what you have directly cited in your thesis. A bibliography is everything you have consulted in your thesis. So you must have a reference list, but only really in the high humanities disciplines do you have both a reference list and a bibliography. Okay, so team, that's it. That's a spine. That is an organisational structure of your thesis that may be of use. Now, all theses will have some elements from that normative organisational structure. About 20 or 25% of theses will have all of those organisational elements. Now, the closer you are to the applied social sciences, allied health, education, the more of those organisational tropes you will use. But I hope for everyone out there that's just a little bit lost, how do I structure this thing? How do I structure this thing? That you've now at least got a few ways of thinking about the movement between form and culture, between form and content. How are you going to build the relationship between what you know and what you are learning? So all these structures come together to build an argument. And the argument is not being built for you. The argument is being built for examiners, for others to assess the work that you've done. So I hope it's been useful. I wish you love, light and peace. Tea out.